should I seek psychological counseling, psychotherapy before embarking on an esoteric path? In other words, is counseling something that would be of assistance to a aspirant, a neophyte on the path? That's what we'll be talking about today. This is Keith Joseph. I am an aspirant in the Institute for Hermetic Studies teacher education program. Today, we're talking about a monograph from Mark Stavish called Pathology of the Sublime. Pathology, of course, is the term meaning sickness or distress, disordered. So Israel Regardie famously suggests on a number of different occasions that anyone that's going to embark on the path of return, on an esoteric path, should begin by engaging in some sort of psychotherapy, psychological counseling. And this is, I think, good advice, but it might not be so easy to get counseling from a wise person, and not all psychotherapists are equal. So what I thought might be helpful would just be to kind of think about why we might seek counseling, and in thinking about why we might seek counseling, maybe we can come up with some alternatives if a wise psychotherapist, a wise counselor is not easily come by. I've known a lot of some psychologists, and a lot of them aren't very wise. They don't have their own lives together. So how helpful can they be? I'm not sure. But if we think about Freud, for example, he's emerging at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. I think the interpretation of dreams is right at the beginning of the 20th century. That's his first big book, major work. And I don't think it's a coincidence that his discoveries come not long after the Industrial Revolution, not long after the democratic revolutions. In other words, the psychological disorders that he's starting to see as commonplace are probably, at least in part, caused by the social, political change, technological changes that people are undergoing. And all of that is just accelerated, right? So it's very easy to satisfy human appetites. It's very easy to be comfortable. But for some reason, there's a lot of psychological distress associated with the modern world, despite those seeming advances. The German sociologist Max Weber called the modern bureaucratic state, the bureaucracy, this rule-based system where human beings are just confronted with a set of rules that they have to, or they're obligated to conform to. He called it an iron cage. And Freud himself wrote a very interesting book called Civilization and Its Discontents. And basically, both of them, Weber and Freud, are showing that the individual in a modern civilization is really going to have their highest aspirations thwarted and subjugated in order for the modern world to kind of continue on. And oddly, both of them thought it was worth it, but they were writing at the beginning of the 20th century. And now, as we enter into the 21st century, into higher levels of dissolution, social dissolution, and more kind of pronounced psychological distress, maybe they might have rethought their endorsements of the iron cage and the need for the civilization, the individual to conform to the demands of the civilization. Who knows? But in any event, there's a lot of psychological distress that is brought about by living in the modern kind of technological world. So one of the insights of Freud, I think, is that the unconscious or the subconscious isn't something that's just buried beneath our conscious mind and kind of bubbles up. It's actually the screen upon which we have experience, or the filter upon which we have our everyday experience. In other words, it creates the form of our experiences. Another way to think about this is the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. He was, I guess, the first philosopher to kind of realize that the human mind is participating in the creation of the things that it perceives. In other words, our mind, so he pointed out, for example, that cause and effect, space and time are categories imposed upon things by the human mind so that make experience possible. He didn't think we could ever get beyond that. I think he's probably mistaken, but that direct experience of ultimate reality beyond cause and effect, beyond time, space and time, those are mystical experiences that are difficult to speak about. Our everyday life in duality is structured the way that he described it, such that the human mind is participating in the creation of the things that it perceives and experiences. So if our psychology is disturbed, unhealthy, sick, it's going to be filtering reality through that distorted lens. And this is the problem, or one of the problems. Because when we engage in esoteric practice, when we engage in the occult, we are purposely shaking up our sense of self and our psychology in order to transform it. And if we're shaking up and disturbing an already disturbed, unhealthy sense of self, real difficulties, psychological difficulties, even psychosis, psychotic breaks can be the result. In the Buddhist tradition, they have this idea of no self. And if you're going to have an experience where your sense of self is somehow dissolved, it better be a kind of coherent, healthy sense of self. In other words, you have to have a self before you can lose a self. And if your self is kind of distorted, it's going to create a massive problem for you. And so these are the things to be kind of wary of before engaging in esoteric practice. You want to have a healthy self-concept. Joseph Lisewski, butchering the pronunciation, but I don't feel so bad about it. I heard Mark even say it's a difficult name to pronounce. He has this idea of the subjective synthesis. In other words, the subject, right, our self, has a way of experience the world, the subjective synthesis, and we can kind of build that subjective synthesis so that it's healthy and as a starting point from which we can begin to transform ourselves. So this is, I guess, where we might want to find the solution to the problem of it's not that easy to find a psychotherapist. It's not that easy to find psychological counseling from a wise psychologist. And I'm not suggesting that they don't exist. I'm sure that they do, but they aren't accessible to all of us. Maybe now with the internet and Zoom, it might be easier, but I think it's still pretty difficult to find a wise psychological counselor who would, support your psychotherapy as a preliminary stage in an esoteric path. It would be great if such a person exists, of course. But another way of approaching that would be to start to just engage in more basic practices that can help you build up your a healthy sense of self. So one of the maybe a couple things to think about. One would be just really basic control over your what's going on with the mind. So really getting negative thoughts under control and negative self-talk under control. And that's not that hard to accomplish if you're kind of rigorous about it. The technique that I mentioned, I think before, that I found really helpful was just rejecting negative thoughts, consciously saying you have a negative thought, you realize you're engaged in negative self-talk. I reject that thought. And I reject that thought. And sometimes I even say that to other people. If they say something negative to me, I might say it lightheartedly, but I just say, I reject that thought. I reject what you are saying about me. I reject the limitation that you're putting on me, right? And you do that to yourself. And so you start to police your own mind, and you think of your mind as your fortress, your castle, and you just make sure that it's a positive place. You can also think about protecting yourself from outside forces that are negative. I think of shields sometimes in my mind, but even more concretely, if I'm somewhere and there's a person who is really negative, shields up, yes, mentally thinking about shields, but also just, I don't look at them, right? I don't invite them into my area. I might even walk away. Sometimes at work, I'm at my desk and there's somebody that I know is just a negative person. I just don't want to be around them. If they're like intent on interacting with me, I'll just go to lunch, or I'll go to the bathroom, or I'll, just get away from them. Just protect yourself, right? Now, we also have more traumatic experiences, and the mind works to kind of protect. The unconscious mind works to protect you from those experiences so that you can survive, right? So if you've read some of the literature of kind of extreme dissociation, often what happens is someone is experiencing trauma, abuse, or something like that. Their mind will separate them out from the experience, so that they're almost an observer of the experience separate from it. And this is just a coping or protective mechanism. And a lot of times the mind will kind of create forgetfulness. You'll forget those things, and they'll be there, but there'll be a forgetting of them. So those are the kinds of more difficult things that can be harder to work out by yourself. And that's where, some sort of psychotherapy, some sort of psychological counseling can be helpful. And in those extreme cases, maybe you don't need your counselor to know that your intention is to progress along a more spiritual path. You can just work it out and then take care of yourself. So I don't have a definitive answer if you should get counseling before engaging on the path. I would think that you might want to just consider your own history, your own experiences, and of course, your age and experience. As an old enough, I know that I've just had to work through things and either out with friends or family or just social relationships, and you just work things out. It might take a lot longer to do it that way than with the psychological counselor, but sometimes, you know, things just work out. You can work out, you know, relationships with parents and so forth, that might have been difficult when you're younger, and then as you're older, you can work those things out. If you've had experience with counseling that you are willing to share, I would love to hear your experiences. If you've found it helpful, if you've found counselors that weren't helpful, if you have recommendations, please leave a comment. I'd love to engage with you there. And I'm going to be working on hopefully some more videos regularly and try to get them out. And I will see you in the next one.